I think we all know about the direct effects of cover crops on nutrients, whether we're talking about uptake, whether we're talking about translocation, whether we're talking about nitrogen fixation. So I'm going to keep moving here. I think we know about indirect effects. We know that the soil can be transformed in terms of its capacity to support healthy root growth so that we get more nutrient uptake, more water uptake, even though we might not have direct changes in nutrient availability. Okay. Let's step back a little bit. How many of you attended this conference in 1991? Really, nobody. Okay, I'm surprised because this is a conference that really was a who's who of cover crops in 1991. And when I look out in the audience here, I do see a who's who of cover crops today. So I thought there'd be some overlap. Over 60 articles are available in the proceedings, which are available for free download from the Soil and Water Conservation Society. So if you weren't there and haven't looked at this, I encourage you to take a look. There are over 20 articles specifically related to nutrient management. So I'd encourage you, if your interest is in nutrient management, especially to take a look. Okay, so groundwater impacts, surface water impacts, nitrogen cycling, all covered in great detail. We actually knew a lot in 1991. A little over a year ago on an ag forum online, a farmer said, I need some winter reading. I need something to think about. And so various people were suggesting things to read, and I posted a link to those proceedings, the 1991 proceedings, and I said, there's a lot of good stuff here. And some farmers took a look. One farmer who's a good friend of mine who I think is here at this meeting, but I haven't seen him yet, Terry Taylor, said, and that's his farm in southeast Illinois, very innovative guy, planting green. You know, not a lot of farmers do that, but Terry Taylor is a pioneer. He said, it concerns me that many of the questions we ask about cover crops today were asked 20 years ago, actually 23 years ago, but were not pursued aggressively. Was it due to a lack of funding, a lack of grower interest, or was it a part of some great conspiracy? My challenge to all of you is let's not look back 20 plus years from now at this meeting and say we haven't progressed. I think we have progressed since 1991, but I think the fact is that a lot of the science already was established in 1991, such as the fact that cover crops can reduce nitrate leaching. We have lots more evidence of that, but we knew that very well in 1991. This is work from Tom Casper showing about a 60% reduction in nitrate concentration where cereal rye was planted. We have more evidence now of the timing of how nitrogen is released once it has been taken up by cover crops, and we'll hear more about that very soon. We have some special work being done in Illinois looking at fall nitrogen, which is not an exciting topic to most environmental people, but we're looking at how we can combine fall nitrogen with cover crops to potentially get that release more timely. We have people looking now not just at nitrate, but at nitrate transformation into nitrous oxide and other gases. That's something that we hadn't done very much of back in 1991. We have people now doing some interesting modeling work, looking at spatial and temporal models. This is work in Massachusetts where they were trying to figure out the critical planting dates for cereal rye. We have models that look at how cover crops can fit with many other strategies in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus reduction scenarios. This specifically was in Iowa, but of course we're looking at this for the whole, for the Chesapeake, for the Mississippi Basin. And so what you can see here is cover crops can make a big difference relative to these other strategies. But in terms of cost, cover crops, if we look at just absolute cost per pound and not think about who's paying that cost, the absolute cost per pound can be kind of high. Okay. We can look at things like edge of field scenarios and compare them to cover crops, and we can see that those costs actually look kind of low. But who is willing to pay those costs? Farmers might be willing to pay that $6 or something in that range. There are other estimates that are as low as $2 or $3. But are farmers willing to install those edge of field practices on their dime? I don't think very many will be willing to do that. We have new species of cover crops that have gotten a lot of attention since 1991, such as radishes. This is work at the University of Maryland. Lots of evidence that radishes have an excellent root system for scavenging nitrogen, as well as modifying physical properties and doing other things to soil. But what happens to that nitrogen after the radishes have taken it up? That's a riddle that we are figuring out, but it's a challenging riddle because that nitrogen can be released too quickly. We also have other nutrients that are being scavenged by radish. Phosphorus is an impressive story that I think Charlie White, is he here in the room? Charlie White is here at this meeting, and he did this work at the University of Maryland. And radishes are taking up a lot more than nitrogen and mobilizing a lot more than nitrogen, and that's something to think about. So where do you look to see this new work that's been done since 1991? A great clearinghouse, of course, is the Midwest Cover Crop Council website. I think probably all of us, or most of us, have been there. If you haven't looked at these innovator profiles, take a look at those. My students wrote those. For a single publication, a single lit review, and there have been many lit reviews since 1991 that are good, and I looked at a bunch of them, but for a single lit review, I would recommend this one, The Use of Cover Crops to Manage Soil, which is in this new publication, Soil Management, Building a Stable Base for Agriculture. In terms of getting the story out to lots of people that are directly guiding agriculture, Crops and Soils, which is received by every CCA in America, over 15,000 of them, they've had some special coverage of cover crops. So we've been getting the story out anew. We even have the International Plant Nutrition Institute putting out bulletins about cover crops. That would not have happened in 1991. We have publications like this one focusing on several interesting things, focusing on combining conservation with high technology agriculture, and of course we have funders like the Buffett Foundation that supports this publication. And we have some new players, some very important new players in terms of getting this story out about what cover crops can do for nutrient management, but also for wildlife. And so, of course, the National Wildlife Federation and the Sierra Club and American Farmland Trust are all players that were not players in 1991. How many of you have looked at this publication, Future Friendly Farming? Okay, it's great. You guys should definitely take a look. My students are reading these case studies while I'm here. And the number one practice that they identify there is cover crops, as well as 7 other practices are profiled, and also you can see at the top the specific benefits that they explore in a bunch of case studies. But this is probably the thing that is most interesting to me. Of all the different things I've talked about that have happened since 1991, this letter to the editor focuses in on something that I think is especially important. This is a farmer that I have not met, and I'm not sure. There are a lot of farmers that are at this meeting, so maybe Tim will be here. But this is a farmer who wrote to the Des Moines Register and said, I have proof on my farm that the tile outlets are releasing less nitrate, 50% less nitrate. How does he know that? Because he is part of the Agriculture's Clean Water Alliance testing. This is a group, an industry group, that is doing intensive water quality monitoring in Iowa. When I say industry group, I'm talking about the retailers. The people who are applying the anhydrous ammonia are also supporting the water quality testing. Okay. I won't read through all of this, but this is, I think, a very powerful piece from their website. The data will point to both challenges and solutions. After several years of gathering and analyzing water monitoring data from our local streams, rivers, and lakes, we began working with partners to implement, evaluate, and demonstrate solutions, and cover crops are one of the solutions they're looking at. I think I'll go on at this point, but the point is that right here, they are willing to recognize that there are problems and that they have to roll with the data. They have to accept that the data is going to identify things that they're doing wrong and things that they can do right, and maybe, hopefully, from their perspective, identify things that they are doing well, so the public will say farmers actually are better managers than the public might perceive. In Illinois, we have a similar approach, but I don't think as maybe as publicly appreciated as the alliance in Iowa. KIC 2025, the idea is keep it in the crops, and the idea is EPA, let us, the industry, figure out how to prove that we can do this by 2025, and if we haven't demonstrated specific improvements, then we will accept more regulation. All across the United States, we're seeing industry efforts like this. We need to support this type of effort. We need them to succeed. Because at the same time as we have the industry leading things like KIC 2025, we also have this. Get your tiling done now while you still can before it's regulated. And I don't know if you're seeing this in your areas, but everywhere, when I drove down to Quincy, Illinois, I saw evidence of tiling. There's evidence of tiling all over the Midwest right now. Yield monitors are telling farmers just how powerful tiling is. Farmers have data. Some of it is overwhelming data. Yield monitors give farmers too much data, but they have clear evidence, even if they don't do any statistical analysis of the data, that tiling is improving their crop productivity. And there are farmers that are trying to do this tiling right. Most farmers, when they try to do it right, are simply trying to improve the crop performance. But there are some farmers that really are trying to do it right in terms of water quality. And so this is a farmer in Ohio, and I removed his name, but he put in 11 water control structures. So he's doing controlled drainage, and his idea here was that surely somebody could help him to see whether these 11 structures were actually making a difference on his farm. But he couldn't find anybody to help him with the water sampling and analysis. Now, hopefully somebody here can help this guy out. I'm trying to connect with some people in Ohio right now, but I know there are people, lots of people from Ohio at this meeting. Bottom line is that farmers need to have data. Today's farmers use data to guide their management. We should not be putting in these types of practices without also the same dollars. The allocation to support installation should also support monitoring. This is a slide I've used many times, and I'll just very briefly say we all know farmers that are early adopters, the first people to put in the water control structures. But we also know farmers that are not just early adopters, but are people who specifically figure out how to best utilize technologies on their farm. They adapt technologies to their farms. And the farmers that make cover crops work are not just early adopters. While they may be, they are also master adapters. What I want you to think about is, how many people do you know who are in that situation where they have done something but they don't have the proof that it's working? How many master adapters do you know? People like Ralph Upton, Junior Upton in Illinois, are people that, long before I ever met him, I read this article and I decided I have to have students start doing interview projects because we need more stories like this story that I read when I first came to Illinois. We need more stories like the story of this guy in Wisconsin who just recently, this was a post that he put on Ag Talk, Ag Forum. He was saying, I need proof that cover crops are helping me. Not proof that, that they are having this, very general effect. I need proof that my soil health is improving and that my bottom line is improving. And I suggested to him, well, I think I know some people in Wisconsin that could do some on-farm monitoring. He said, I would love to be in contact with them. Farmers could see this type of thing very easily, the difference between hedgerow and field. The fact is that we need to figure out how to implement our current strategies in a way that farmers can see stuff that is, much more subtle than this, okay? When we think about the 4R concept that's being pushed very hard by industry right now and has lots of value, we need to think about how do cover crops fit into this strategy. Cover crops shouldn't be separate from the 4Rs. Cover crops need to fit in the 4Rs, and we need to have monitoring and data that is coming from not just research stations, but the master adapters' farms so they can see how it works. Things like monitoring nitrogen, scavenging, and then release from cover crops cannot be done like this on very many farms and have that really work for production agriculture today. Obviously, that works for our research, but that is not the future of monitoring nitrogen scavenging and release. Maybe we need to use pasture probes. You know, maybe every farmer who is a master adapter just should receive one of these pasture probes so they can go out there and just like these people who are monitoring their pastures, they need to know the dry matter production. Maybe we can monitor cover crop production with that. Or maybe we need to use canopy sensors. But definitely we need much more numerical data so that our farmers today that are accustomed to following data to their decisions, we need to have data that doesn't come from practices that are research practices. Okay. We need to think about whether fertilizing cover crops actually is a strategy that in the long run scavenges more nutrients and does more for us. This was a study in Illinois on my research farm. I doubled the radish biomass by putting on 20 pounds of nitrogen. We need to think about our legume cover crops as being more than just nitrogen fixers. They take up, obviously, all the plant essential elements. And we need to think about how those nutrients are being cycled. We need to think about the intense weather that we've been having. And we need to think about the fact that most of our nutrient losses occur during those events. So we should not just think about monitoring the typical performance of cover crops. We need to think about how do cover crops perform during those situations. I think this is a great story here. Just very briefly, I'll say that there was a lot of assessment, a lot of, I guess, revisiting what did we do right and what did we do wrong after this tremendous calamity in 2008 in eastern Iowa. And one of the main findings that I talk about in my classes is that they found that there's more than an additive effect. There are synergies when you put conservation practices together. Okay. So, as we work with farmers to figure out how they should use cover crops to manage nutrients and all these other practices, we need to accept that farmers today are interested in precision. We need to think about cover crops as a precision practice, getting the right practices in the right places at the right time and the right scale. It's a very important concept in conservation, but it's especially important in cover crops. We need to think about programs like CSP and figure out how to really make them work for us in a way that doesn't require, what was so clear in this discussion on Ag Talk was that the only farmers that are satisfied with CSP are the farmers who have a really good NRCS staff person to work with, and that is not necessarily the norm. Okay? So, to wrap up, this is a paraphrase of a quote. I've been thinking about this concept for a long time, and I was sure that I could find this quote at some point during the last 12 hours of getting on and off my computer, and I could not find it. So this is not necessarily exactly his words, but Liberty Hyde Bailey said something along the lines of, Tell them why, and they will figure out how. He was talking about the early concept of extension. So much of the information that we try to provide is how a farmer should do things. We need to figure out how to give them the data, not data that is unusable, but data that really works in terms of guiding decisions, really works because it comes from their farms, so that they could figure out how to benefit from that cleaner water or those nutrient levels in their soils moving in desired directions. So I'll just conclude by saying this is something that I talk about that has nothing directly to do with cover crops in my sustainable ag class. In Illinois, we have the Illinois Farm Business Farm Management Association. We have 25% of the acres of Illinois have their financial information going into a database. The other farmers are able to see what is profitable. They don't get to see the identity of the other farmers, but they get to see what types of strategies are profitable, and it guides their management. And this is being done all across the Midwest and, of course, across the United States. The differences between farmers are unbelievable. I'll just leave with you this right here. This is back during a time frame, 1995 to 2000, when profitability was very difficult. The average profitability, well, I should say the average margin in Illinois agriculture at this time was about 0. But there were some farms, the top 5%, that were making $94 an acre over that time frame. And the bottom 26%, minus $54 an acre. The margin between them, $148. There are huge differences between how farmers manage. We need to figure out why it is that the farmers who are making cover crops work, what it is about them that make the cover crops work. And we need to think about, I guess the very last concept, we need to think about how many nutrients are being lost, how much sediment is being lost from these farmers that aren't getting the job done in terms of their management. And are our programs just preaching to the choir and helping these people? Or are we really figuring out ways? The biggest challenge of all in agriculture is to figure out ways to improve the nutrient management where it's being done the worst. So I think I used all my time.